Now that you master Redux and we created our own middleware, it's time to jump to another subject, which will be animations. So in this section, we're going to study different approaches that you can use to animate components inside your React application, and we're going to implement two of them. The first one will be a pure CSS way of animating things, and the last one will be a more programmatic way by using React animation add-ons. So let's not waste more time and start talking about animations. So let's get started. In this video, we're going to see different approaches of animating elements in React, discussing the pros and cons of each one of the solutions we're going to see. I like to think about animation solutions as a mixture between CSS and JavaScript. There are some solutions that are more close to CSS and some others that are more close to JavaScript, but all of them have both elements inside of it in some way. Just in case, this diagram is not exact or whatsoever, but it gives us, at least at a first glance, a quick idea of where are some solutions throughout this spectrum. So let's get started to see some of them. The first one in here is called animate.css. As we're going to see further, animate.css is a CSS library that gives us a bunch of predefined CSS classes to apply to our elements. Then we can find solutions such as style components. Style components is not an animation library itself, but it has a very handy animation API that we can use to move things around in the screen. Then we have another one very popular called React animation add-ons. As we're going to see, this gives us the ability to animate elements throughout the life cycle of the component. We can also use React State API to animate things. It's usually not that common to use it, but technically you can. And of course, there is another bunch of solutions that we're not going to discuss in this video, but it's good if you get the time to watch them or research about them. So let's explain a little bit more further of some of them. Let's start by animate.css. As we said, animate.css is a CSS pure library that gives us, to the user, a bunch of predefined CSS classes that animate things around in some predefined ways. Because of this, it's very easy to use. It's just adding a CSS class when the user clicks on something or on any other type of interaction in which we want to trigger animation. However, because it's predefined, it's also hard to extend. If we want, for example, to the animation to last twice as it's predefined, we will have to override all the animation from this library itself. But if we stick with the predefined classes, we're going to have some very handy animations in just some minutes. Another solution is style component. As I already said, style components is not an animation library itself, but it has an API called keyframes that enables the user to create some very cool and custom animations inside our components. Of course, to make use of this API, we have to make use of style components as a whole. So if you're not using style components inside your project, you can't use the keyframes API to animate things. But if you're using style components, the keyframes API is very easy to use and very powerful. Then we have what is called React animation add-ons. React animation add-on, if you remember, is more of a JavaScript library rather than a CSS library. But as we're going to see in next videos, we still need to define some CSS classes to make it work. React animation add-ons provides an animation components API. Basically, we define animation inside the render method of our component or in the JSX of our functional component. The bad thing about this library is that it delays the component mounting and unmounting to give place to animation. So it's very easy to animate the entrance or the exit of elements in the screen without doing that much work. With other solutions, this type of animations can be very hard to build. But since this API is a little bit more powerful than the previous one, it's also more complex to use. And then, as I said, we can make use of React State API to animate things around. How? By applying inline styles to our elements in the screen and updating the state many times to get the type of animations that we want. I usually wouldn't recommend this type of solution unless you have to build something very specific that does not justify installing a new dependency just for that feature.